While Margaret rested in the hospital bed, a deep melancholy enveloped her. She contemplated that her journey was coming to an end and found herself in profound isolation. She felt an overwhelming longing for her husband, but what tormented her the most was the absence of her inseparable parrot, Charlie. Margaret believed she would never see Charlie again until one day an exciting surprise awaited her. The hospital staff and a respected bird rescue group joined forces to bring Charlie to the hospital for a special visit. When she received the news, a smile of happiness lit up her face, and she immediately rushed to embrace her faithful companion. It had been a long time since the last hug and the last petting of Charlie's head. Margaret was aware that it would likely be the final farewell, so she held back her tears of sadness and made an effort to show her strength. The moment was heartbreaking for her and everyone around her as their hearts broke when they saw that the visit had to end. Margaret tried to persuade the team to allow Charlie to stay with her, but unfortunately, it wasn't possible. However, as the bird rescue team was about to take Charlie away, he did something truly extraordinary, surprising everyone present. Margaret was a kind and loving soul, always nurturing a deep appreciation for animals. She had a special bond with all creatures, including her loyal African gray parrot, Charlie, who had shared her life for over 5 decades, being her constant companion in all phases of life. Margaret adopted Charlie when he was just a young troubled bird destined for an animal shelter. With love and dedication, she turned him into her inseparable companion, her soulmate, and her most loyal friend throughout the many experiences they shared. Throughout the decades, Charlie remained a loyal companion to Margaret, providing her with comfort and support in every time of need. Some years after Margaret's husband's passing, they faced a cancer diagnosis, and her health began to decline. Margaret dedicated herself to spending as much time as possible with Charlie, taking him with her wherever she went. Margaret wished to shield her parrot from the harsh reality of her illness and bravely fought against her ailment. However, her health deteriorated to the point where she could no longer care for herself. She felt distressed for her beloved bird, who now spent most of his time locked by her side. Faced with a heartbreaking decision, Margaret, after several days of contemplation, realized that her condition was rapidly worsening and made the difficult choice to receive palliative care, aware that she couldn't take with her what broke her heart. She knew it was best for both of them, her and her parrot. Several months later, lying in the hospital bed, Margaret reflected on all the shared experiences with Charlie over the years. She recalled the day she brought him home, a young, skinny, and anxious bird, and how he had transformed into a beautiful and intelligent companion. She revisited the countless hours they had spent together, talking, laughing, and enjoying Charlie's company. Despite the sadness of her current situation, Margaret couldn't help but smile as she remembered all the love and joy Charlie had brought into her life. She longed to see him one more time. Sarah, the current hospital director, was the first to notice Margaret's nostalgic smile as she helped her back to bed after using the bathroom. Sarah asked why Margaret was smiling, and Margaret sighed as she responded. "My parrot, Charlie, meant much more," Margaret replied. Sarah had no knowledge of Charlie's existence, let alone the significance he held in Margaret's life. As the nurse arranged the blankets near Margaret, she asked further questions about Charlie, and was delighted to hear Margaret share numerous captivating stories about the adventures she and Charlie had experienced over the years. Margaret never had children with Jack, her husband, whom she met during a solitary trip to Greece at the age of 20. Jack was also traveling alone, and the two decided to team up on their journey. One day, while riding a motorcycle on a back road, they nearly ran over a clumsy-looking gray parrot. Margaret immediately rescued the bird and wrapped it in her jacket, taking it to the vet. She couldn't bear to part with Charlie and did everything in her power to care for him. A few months later, Jack joined her, and a few months after that they got married. Charlie even played a special role in the wedding, carrying the wedding rings. Margaret never imagined her life would take this turn, but she couldn't be happier. Sarah listened attentively to the entire story, surprised by Margaret's life narrative, once again reminded of the many unique individuals in the world and the fascinating lives her patients had lived before coming to the hospital. As the days passed, the bond between Sarah and Margaret grew stronger. They spent nearly every afternoon together, after Margaret's brief daily walk, with her sharing stories of all the adventures she had experienced alongside her husband and Charlie during a special period of time. As autumn colors began to manifest, Margaret's health showed some signs of stability. However, the cancer persisted, and she chose to discontinue chemotherapy to make the most of her remaining months. She endured a great deal of pain during this time, and as winter arrived, the pain became unbearable. Margaret felt profoundly lonely, and when Sarah wasn't around to talk to her, Margaret spent much of her time gazing out the window. Sometimes, the only thing Margaret could do was be alone in her room, thinking about Charlie. She was determined to prolong her life for as long as possible, simply to have more time with her beloved parrot. If only she could see him one last time, Margaret knew she could depart in peace. Finally, on a specific day, Margaret shared her last wish with Sarah, longing for a farewell with Charlie. The head nurse reacted with enthusiasm, as she had dealt with similar requests in the past, often related to cats, dogs, and once even a horse. Margaret promised to do everything in her power to make this wish come true. After some research, Sarah discovered that Charlie had already been delivered to a bird rescue center. I was confident that Charlie would spend the rest of his days well cared for, flying freely and receiving love. However, at the bird rescue center, everyone agreed to do their utmost to reunite Charlie and Margaret one last time. The idea seemed to deeply affect Margaret and also brought joy to Charlie. He was clearly unsettled by the sudden change in his life, but he knew how much Margaret needed him, just as he needed her. Both longed for the reunion as soon as possible, but there was a slight setback. A man who was also in the same hospital as Margaret had a significant fear of birds, so Sarah had to arrange for the transfer of this man to another room. Although Margaret was saddened by this, the man felt too weak to protest. Finally, the long-awaited moment arrived. Charlie surprised his former owner and the hospital staff as the bird rescue center collaborated to bring him to Margaret's room. The sudden transfer left me somewhat shocked, and Charlie initially reacted with loud squawks. However, when they entered Margaret's room, Charlie suddenly changed and fell silent as his cage was wheeled down the hospital corridors. Charlie seemed to be looking at Margaret when they reached the room, and Margaret's joy was expressed in screams of delight. Margaret heard the screams of her beloved parrot and couldn't believe it when the door opened and Charlie was brought to her. His screams were deafening to the medical equipment, but as melodious as music to Margaret's ears. She immediately reached out to embrace him, and he seemed as happy as she was as she hugged him and stroked his feathered head. Margaret shared with Charlie all the words she had wanted to say to him in the past few months, and it seemed like Charlie understood each one. Margaret knew it would likely be the last time she would see him, and fought back tears of sadness. Charlie seemed happy to be back in her arms, but also appeared to realize that his former owner was not well. Margaret understood that her time with Charlie had a limit. She lovingly stroked her dear parrot one last time, before handing him over to the rescue team. Despite it being a final farewell, she found serenity in sharing that moment with people who loved her. Margaret, in fulfilling her last wish, left behind her life, while Charlie found a new home in the hands of someone as special as his former owner. This story is touching and underscores the deep bond between Margaret and Charlie, emphasizing the importance of connections between humans and their pets. It illustrates how people are willing to overcome obstacles to make special moments possible, and how the love between humans and animals can provide comfort even in the toughest times. It's an emotional narrative that celebrates the beauty of relationships between humans and their pets.